ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution in the mode prescribed by law, and that you shall be transferred to the custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison for Women. And further, on the 12th day of January, 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock by a sufficient current of electricity. May God have mercy upon you.
Case 1. Christa Pike. Courtroom footage shows the moment 18-year-old Christa Pike was sentenced to death for murdering classmate Colleen Slemmer. Christa's story begins in Beckley, West Virginia, where she was born into a troubled life. By the time she turned 20, she had already earned a dark distinction, becoming the youngest woman in America sentenced to death during the modern era of capital punishment. At just 18 years old, jealousy consumed her. She attended a Job Corps program where she met 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. Christa convinced herself that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend, and that belief would lead to unspeakable horror. January 12, 1995 started like any other day. But Christa had already made plans with her friend Shadula Peterson and her boyfriend Tadero Ship. Together, they plotted to confront Colleen. They lured the unsuspecting young woman to an isolated spot near the University of Tennessee campus. What happened next was beyond brutal. For approximately 30 minutes, they attacked Colleen, taunting her, beating her, and slashing her with knives. They carved a pentagram into her flesh. Then, Christa grabbed a chunk of asphalt and smashed it repeatedly into Colleen's skull until she died. But the horror didn't end there. Christa took a piece of Colleen's skull as a twisted souvenir, a trophy of her crime. The very next day, Christa couldn't contain herself. She showed off the piece of skull to her classmates, bragging about what she had done. Her own words became her downfall. Someone reported her, and police arrived to arrest her. During interrogation, Christa confessed to everything. In March 1996, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced her to death for the murder and gave her 25 additional years for conspiracy. Prison didn't reform her. In August 2001, while behind bars, Christa attacked another inmate, trying to strangle her with a shoelace. 3 years later, in 2004, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder for that attack. Authorities placed her in solitary confinement. For nearly 29 years, Christa lived alone in a tiny cell. Finally, in September 2024, a court settlement ended her solitary confinement. Her attorneys have argued that her young age at the time of the crime should matter, pointing to research about adolescent brain development. As of October 2025, Christa Pike sits on death row, scheduled for execution on September 30th, 2026. She has been waiting for death for approximately 29 years.
Case 2. Christy Michelle Scott. On August 16, 2008, in Russellville, Alabama, flames engulfed a home. Inside, 6-year-old Mason Scott was trapped. He died in the fire. His mother, 30-year-old Christy Michelle Scott, had intentionally set the blaze. Investigators began piecing together the evidence. They discovered that Christy had recently taken out substantial life insurance policies on her young son, totaling over $100,000. The timing was suspicious. They dug deeper into her computer records. What they found was chilling. Christy had been searching online for information about fire-related deaths. She had researched how fires kill, how quickly they spread, and what evidence they destroy. Then they found receipts showing she had purchased gasoline shortly before the fire. The pieces fell into place. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated murder motivated by greed. In August 2009, prosecutors charged Christy Michelle Scott with capital murder. The evidence was overwhelming. A jury found her guilty. They deliberated on her sentence and voted 7-5 in favor of life imprisonment without parole. But the judge disagreed with the jury's recommendation. Using his power of judicial override, he imposed the death penalty instead. Christy would die for killing her own child. As of October 2025, Christy Michelle Scott has spent over 15 years on Alabama's death row. Her case continues through appeals and legal reviews. No execution date has been scheduled yet, but she remains in prison, waiting to learn when she will face her final punishment. Case 3. Tiara Capri Gobble. In 2004, emergency responders rushed to a home in Dothan, Alabama. They found 4-month-old Phoenix Parrish unresponsive. Despite desperate efforts to save him, the infant was dead. An autopsy revealed the horrifying truth. Phoenix had died from blunt force trauma to his tiny head. The injuries were consistent with being violently shaken or struck with tremendous force. Someone had brutally attacked this helpless baby. Investigators turned their attention to Phoenix's mother, 25-year-old Tiara Capri Gobble. The evidence pointed directly at her. She was the one responsible for the fatal injuries that ended her son's life. In 2005, Tiara stood trial for capital murder. The jury heard the medical evidence, the testimony, and the facts of the case. They voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty. The judge sentenced Tiara to death. She was sent to the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama, where she has remained ever since. Now 44 years old, Tiara Capri Gobble has spent nearly 20 years on death row. She has aged behind bars while her son remains forever frozen at just 4 months old. As of October 2025, her case continues through the appeals process. There is no scheduled execution date yet. She waits in her cell day after day, knowing that eventually her time will come. Case 4. Socorro Susan Caro. Born on March 27, 1957, in California, Socorro Susan Caro lived what appeared to be a privileged life. She was married to Dr. Xavier Caro, and together they had 4 children living in Camaro, California. But behind closed doors, their marriage was crumbling. Reports indicated serious marital difficulties. The stress and conflict were building towards something terrible. November 22, 1999, was the night everything fell apart. While her 3 young sons slept peacefully in their beds, Socorro entered their rooms one by one. She shot 11-year-old Joey, then 8-year-old Michael, and finally 5-year-old Christopher. Each child died in their sleep, never knowing what was happening. Only the youngest child survived. The baby was unharmed. After murdering her 3 sons, Socorro turned the gun on herself, shooting herself in the head. But she didn't die. She survived the self-inflicted wound and was found in the family home when authorities arrived. In 2002, Socorro Caro was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including multiple murders. The judge sentenced her to death. As of October 2025, Socorro Caro is 67 years old. She has been on death row for approximately 23 years. She has spent more than 2 decades behind bars, longer than any of her sons lived. Her case remains one of California's most tragic family murders, a stark example of how mental anguish and marital problems can lead to the unthinkable destruction of innocent lives. Case 5. Manling Tsang Williams.
Born in 1979, Manling Tsang Williams seemed to have a normal family life. She was married to Neil Williams, and they had 2 young sons, 7-year-old Devon and 3-year-old Ian. They lived together in their Rowland Heights, California home. But on August 7, 2007, that family was destroyed forever. Manling began with her children. She took a pillow and pressed it over their faces, one after another. Devon struggled, then went still. Little Ian, barely more than a toddler, suffered the same fate. Both boys were smothered to death by their own mother. Then came her husband. Manling picked up a samurai sword and attacked Neil with savage fury. She struck him again and again and again. By the time she finished, Neil had suffered over 90 wounds across his body. The attack was vicious, prolonged, and merciless. Neighbors called police when they heard the commotion. Officers arrived to find a scene of absolute horror. 3 bodies, blood everywhere, and Manling still in the house. In 2010, a jury found Manling guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to death. As of October 2025, Manling Tsang Williams has been on death row for over 14 years. She sits in her cell at a California prison, waiting for the day when the state will execute her for destroying her entire family. The case shocked the community and raised questions about what could drive a mother to such extreme violence. But no answer could ever justify the murder of 2 innocent children and their father.
Case 6. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman. Born on January 19, 1962, in St. Louis, Missouri, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman endured a violent childhood. Her father abandoned the family, leaving her mother struggling to care for the children. At one point, her mother even tried to give them away. 18, Kaufman had married and become a mother herself, but the marriage quickly fell apart. Seeking a fresh start, she moved to Arizona with a friend. That's where she met James Gregory Marlowe, who had just been released from jail. The pair became inseparable. They married quickly and began using methamphetamine together. Their drug use fueled an escalating pattern of violence. Between October and November 1986, Kaufman and Marlowe went on a horrific crime spree across multiple states. On October 11, 1986, in Costa Mesa, California, they abducted and murdered 32-year-old Sandra Neary. On October 28, 1986, in Bullhead City, Arizona, they killed 35-year-old Pamela Simmons. On November 7, 1986, in Redlands, California, they kidnapped and murdered 20-year-old Corinna Novis. Finally, on November 12, 1986, in Huntington Beach, California, they abducted and killed 19-year-old Lynell Murray. Their reign of terror ended on November 14, 1986, when police apprehended them both. During interrogation, Kaufman confessed to all the murders. Her defense attorneys argued that she suffered from battered woman syndrome. They claimed Marlowe had beaten, brainwashed, and starved her, forcing her participation in the crimes. But prosecutors presented evidence showing she was an active participant. In 1990, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in California to receive a death sentence since the state reinstated capital punishment in 1977. As of October 2025, Cynthia Kaufman is 63 years old and has been on California's death row for approximately 35 years. She remains there, one of the longest-serving women on death row in America.
Case 7. Maria del Rosio, Rosie Alfaro. At just 18 years old, Maria del Rosio Alfaro, known as Rosie, committed a crime so brutal it would shock Anaheim, California. On June 15, 1990, Rosie visited the home of 9-year-old Autumn Wallace. She knew Autumn through the girl's older sister. Rosie told them she needed to use the bathroom, and they let her inside without suspicion. But Rosie hadn't come to use the bathroom. She had come to steal. She was desperate for money to feed her substance addiction, and she believed the family had valuables worth taking. Once inside, Rosie attacked little Autumn with a knife. She stabbed the child approximately 50 times in a frenzied, brutal assault. Autumn's screams went unheard. By the time Rosie stopped, the 9-year-old girl was dead. Then Rosie ransacked the house, searching for anything valuable. She gathered what she could find and left. Later that day, she sold the stolen items for $240, which she immediately used to purchase drugs. Police quickly identified Rosie as a suspect. The evidence against her was overwhelming. In 1992, she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Orange County to receive a death sentence. As of October 2025, Rosie Alfaro has been on California's death row for over 32 years. She has spent more than 3 decades behind bars, far longer than Autumn Wallace lived. The case remains one of Orange County's most heartbreaking crimes. A young life brutally ended so an addict could get high for a few hours. Case 8. Veronica Utilia Gonzalez. Born on December 1, 1961, in San Diego, California, Veronica Utilia Gonzalez was 33 years old when she and her husband, Ivan Joe Gonzalez, committed an unspeakable crime. The victim was Veronica's own niece, 4-year-old Genevieve Jenny Rojas. Jenny's mother, Mary Rojas, was Veronica's sister. When Mary entered a rehabilitation program and her husband was arrested for child abuse, authorities removed Jenny and her siblings from their custody. Initially, the children were placed with their grandmother, but later, Jenny was sent to live with Veronica and Ivan. They had more space and resources, or so everyone believed. No one realized they were sending Jenny to her death. Behind closed doors, Veronica and Ivan subjected Jenny to horrific abuse. They forced her to live inside a box. They hung her by her hands from a hook in a closet, leaving her suspended in agony. They burned her skin with a hairdryer, leaving permanent scars. On November 6, 1995, Jenny was found dead in the Gonzalez home. The autopsy revealed the full extent of her suffering. Severe physical abuse, burns, bruises, and catastrophic internal injuries. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Police arrested Veronica and charged her with first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture and mayhem. In 1998, a jury found her guilty and sentenced her to death. As of October 2025, Veronica Gonzalez is 63 years old and has been on death row for approximately 27 years. She awaits execution for torturing and murdering her own niece, a helpless 4-year-old child who had nowhere else to go. Case 9. Kathy Lyn Serenina. In December 2005, 30-year-old Kathy Lyn Serenina and her husband, Raul Ricardo Serenina, took in 2 nephews, 14-year-old Conrad Morales and 11-year-old Ricky Morales. They told everyone they wanted to provide care for the boys in their Corona, California home. But instead of offering safety, the Sereninas subjected the children to prolonged abuse and neglect. The boys were beaten regularly. They were denied food. They were tortured. On December 25, 2005, Christmas Day, 11-year-old Ricky was found dead inside a closet in the Serenina residence. His body showed severe injuries consistent with sustained physical abuse. He had been beaten so badly and so often that his small body couldn't survive. As investigators looked deeper, they discovered that 14-year-old Conrad had also been a victim of similar mistreatment. He too had died from the abuse, his death just as tragic as his younger brother's. In June 2009, Kathy Serenina was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for her role in Ricky Morales' death. Her husband, Raul, received a similar sentence for his involvement in the boys' deaths. As of October 2025, Kathy Lyn Serenina is 50 years old and has been on California's death row for over 15 years. She awaits execution for torturing and murdering the nephews she had promised to protect. The case stands as one of California's most disturbing examples of family violence, where children seeking safety found only suffering and death.
Case 10. Cherie Lash Rhodes. Born on December 13, 1969, Cherie Lash Rhodes became the chairperson of the Cedarville Rancheria, a federally recognized Native American tribe in northeastern California. She held a position of power and responsibility within her community. But that power was about to be taken away. Rhodes faced accusations of embezzling federal grant funds. Investigators believed she had misappropriated at least $50,000 intended for the tribe. An eviction hearing was scheduled to address these allegations. On February 20, 2014, during a tribal meeting concerning her potential eviction, Rhodes walked into the tribal office in Alturas, California, armed with a gun. What happened next was a massacre. She opened fire, shooting 4 people dead. Among the victims were her own brother, 50-year-old Rurik Davis, her niece, 19-year-old Angel Penn, her nephew, 30-year-old Glenn Calanico, and the tribal administrator, 47-year-old Sheila Lynn Russo. When her gun ran out of ammunition, Rhodes grabbed a knife and attacked a 5th person. 2 others were wounded during the assault before anyone could stop her. In 2017, Rhodes was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to death plus 150 years. As of October 2025, Rhodes, now 55 years old, has been on death row for over 7 years. She remains imprisoned, awaiting execution for the tribal office massacre that destroyed multiple families within her own community.
Case 11. Lisa Leanne Graham. In July 2007, Lisa Leanne Graham did the unthinkable. She hired someone to murder her own daughter. Lisa's daughter was 20-year-old Stephanie Shea Graham. She was young, with her whole life ahead of her, but her mother had other plans. Lisa recruited a family friend, Kenneth Walton, to carry out the murder. She promised to pay him for his services. Money was the motive, though the exact financial arrangement remains unclear. On July 5, 2007, Walton lured Shea to a secluded area in Russell County, Alabama, under the pretense of offering her a job opportunity. Shea went willingly, trusting the family friend. Once they were alone, Walton pulled out a gun and shot Shea to death. He left her body on a remote dirt road where it was later discovered. Police investigated and quickly unraveled the conspiracy. Lisa Graham had orchestrated her own daughter's murder. Kenneth Walton had pulled the trigger. In March 2015, after an initial mistrial, Lisa Graham was convicted of capital murder for hiring Walton to kill Stephanie Shea Graham. The jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge affirmed their decision, sentencing Lisa to death. Kenneth Walton also received a death sentence for carrying out the murder. As of October 2025, Lisa Graham has been on death row for nearly a decade. She waits for her execution, condemned for the ultimate betrayal, a mother murdering her own child. The case remains one of Alabama's most shocking family crimes, proof that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those who should love us most. Case 12. Kimberly Diane Cargill. Born on November 30th, 1966, Kimberly Diane Cargill was a 43-year-old mother of 4 sons who worked as a nurse in Tyler, Texas. She appeared respectable, hardworking, and normal. But behind that facade, Kimberly had a problem. Child Protective Services was investigating her for child abuse allegations involving her 2 younger sons, Luke and Zach. The authorities were preparing to remove the boys from her custody and place them with relatives. On May 18, 2010, Kimberly violated an agreement by refusing to return her son to her mother after picking him up from daycare. A custody hearing was scheduled, and prosecutors planned to call a key witness, Cherry Walker. Cherry Walker was a 39-year-old woman with intellectual disabilities who worked as Kimberly's babysitter. She and Kimberly had been friends for several years, and Cherry had been a trusted caregiver for Kimberly's children. But now, Cherry had been subpoenaed to testify against Kimberly in the custody case. Kimberly couldn't let that happen. On June 18, 2010, Kimberly lured Cherry to her home under the pretense of needing assistance. Once Cherry was inside, Kimberly attacked her. She wrapped her hands around Cherry's throat and choked her to death. After murdering Cherry, Kimberly disposed of the body. She doused it in lighter fluid and set it on fire, attempting to destroy the evidence. The investigation led authorities directly to Kimberly. In 2012, she was arrested and charged with capital murder. During the trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of her guilt and her motive, silencing a witness. As of October 2025, Kimberly Cargill is 58 years old and has been on death row in Texas for approximately 14 years. She awaits execution for murdering her friend to prevent her from testifying in court. Case 13. Wendi Elizabeth Andriano. She was married to Joe Andriano, who was battling terminal cancer. He was weak, sick, and dependent on her care, but Wendi had other plans. In 2000, in Phoenix, Arizona, Wendi decided to end Joe's life herself. Prosecutors presented evidence that she first attempted to poison him with sodium azide, a deadly chemical. But the poison didn't work fast enough. So Wendi grabbed a bar stool and bludgeoned her dying husband to death. She struck him repeatedly with the heavy furniture until he was dead. Joe was a cancer patient, already suffering and fighting for his life. Instead of compassion, his wife gave him a brutal, violent death. In 2004, Wendi Andriano was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury showed no mercy. As of October 2025, Andriano has been on death row for over 20 years. She is currently held at the Lumley Unit in the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. She waits there, day after day, for the execution that will end her life just as she ended her husband's. The case remains one of Arizona's most disturbing examples of a spouse murdering a terminally ill partner rather than caring for them through their final days. Case 14. Brooke Marie Rodgers.
In 2006, 24-year-old Brooke Marie Rodiers, along with her accomplices Franklin Duell Epps and Omar Hutchinson, committed 2 brutal murders in Riverside County, California. The victims were Milton Chavez and Marvin Gabriel. They thought they were meeting Brooke for pleasure at a motel room. Instead, they were walking into a trap. Once inside the motel room, Brooke and her accomplices revealed their true intentions: robbery. They attacked both men, suffocating them to death. Brooke used her undergarments to strangle the victims. She even forced a pair of panties down one victim's throat. The motive was simple greed. Brooke and her accomplices wanted to steal the men's belongings, and they were willing to kill for it. In October 2010, Brooke Marie Rodiers was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, multiple murders, and murder during the commission of a robbery. The judge sentenced her to death. As of October 2025, Brooke Marie Rodiers has been on California's death row for over 14 years. She is incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, waiting for execution. Case 15. Heather Lavelle Keaton. In 2010, Heather Lavelle Keaton was involved in the deaths of her common-law husband's 2 young children, 3-year-old Chase DeLazzi and 4-year-old Natalie DeLazzi, in Mobile, Alabama. Prosecutors alleged that Heather poisoned both children with antifreeze, a common household chemical that causes a slow, agonizing death. But poisoning wasn't enough. She also choked them to death. After murdering the children, Heather and her partner disposed of their bodies in wooded areas. Chase's remains were found in Alabama, while Natalie's body was discovered across state lines in Mississippi. In 2015, Heather Lavelle Keaton stood trial for these heinous crimes. She was convicted of capital murder for Chase's death and manslaughter for Natalie's death. The judge sentenced her to death, making her the first woman in Mobile County to receive such a sentence. As of October 2025, Lavelle Keaton has been on death row for approximately 10 years. She is incarcerated at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Her appeals have been unsuccessful. There is currently no scheduled execution date, but she remains on death row, awaiting the day when the state will carry out her sentence. The case stands as one of Mobile County's most disturbing child murders, with 2 innocent children poisoned and strangled by someone who should have cared for them. Case 16. Kerry Lyn Dalton. Born on April 15, 1953, in San Diego, California, Kerry Lyn Dalton had a history of substance abuse and criminal activities, including theft and drug-related offenses. Her life spiraled deeper into crime when she became involved with individuals who introduced her to more severe criminal behaviors. These relationships would eventually lead to murder. In June 1988, Kerry and her accomplices abducted Irene Melanie May, a woman known to them. They held her captive and subjected her to severe physical abuse. During the torture, they used harsh chemicals on Irene's body, burning her skin and causing excruciating pain. The abuse continued for an extended period before they finally murdered her. The brutality of the crime shocked the community when authorities discovered Irene's body. The evidence showed prolonged torture and suffering. Kerry Lyn Dalton was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances, including torture and lying in wait. In 1995, she was convicted and sentenced to death. As of October 2025, Kerry Lyn Dalton is 71 years old and has been on death row for over 35 years. She is one of California's longest-serving female death row inmates. No scheduled execution date has been set. She remains imprisoned, aging behind bars, while her victim remains forever gone. The memory of her torture preserved in court records that documented every horrific detail. Case 17. Maureen McDermott. She was a former nurse who faced financial difficulties in the 1980s. Desperate for money, she hatched a plan to solve her problems: murder for insurance money. Her target was Stephen Eldridge, her housemate in Venice, California. Stephen trusted Maureen. They shared a home, and he had no idea she was plotting his death. Maureen sought to claim Stephen's life insurance policy. To accomplish this, she recruited Jimmy Luna, an orderly at the hospital where she worked. She offered him money to carry out the murder. Luna brought accomplices to help. In 1985, they entered the home Maureen shared with Stephen and attacked him. They stabbed him 44 times in a frenzied assault. To mislead investigators, they mutilated Stephen's body afterward, trying to make it appear the murder had been motivated by something intimate rather than financial gain. But investigators saw through the staging. The evidence led them to Maureen, and they unraveled her conspiracy. In 1990, Maureen McDermott was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Initially, she was the sole occupant of the women's death row unit at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. As of October 2025, McDermott has been on death row for over 34 years. She has spent more than 3 decades behind bars for orchestrating the brutal murder of her housemate for insurance money. Case 18. Shawna Forde. She was a former border vigilante and leader of the Minuteman American Defense Group, an anti-immigration organization that operated along the Arizona-Mexico border. In May 2009, Forde and her accomplices, Jason Bush and Albert Gaxola, planned a deadly home invasion in Aravaca, Arizona. Their target was the home of Raul Flores. Forde believed that Flores was involved in drug trafficking and that he kept substantial cash and drugs in his house. Her plan was to rob him to fund their anti-immigration activities. On the night of the invasion, Forde and her accomplices broke into Flores's home. They were armed and ruthless. During the attack, they shot and killed Raul Flores. But they didn't stop there. They also shot and killed his 9-year-old daughter, Brisenia, who was present during the home invasion. Raul's wife, Gina Gonzalez, was also shot, but miraculously survived. Her testimony would prove crucial in bringing the killers to justice. Police arrested Forde, Bush, and Gaxola. During the trial, evidence revealed that Forde had planned the entire attack, convinced that robbing the suspected drug dealer would provide funding for her vigilante group. In 2011, Shawna Forde was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She also received a 65-year prison sentence for the attempted murder of Gina Gonzalez and multiple burglary counts. As of October 2025, Forde has been on death row for approximately 14 years. No scheduled execution date is known. She remains imprisoned in Arizona, condemned for a crime that killed a father and his young daughter.
Case 19. Lyn Michaud. Michelle and her partner, James Anthony DeGorgio, were convicted of kidnapping, assaulting, and murdering 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson in Pleasanton, California in 1997. The couple used a specially equipped van to abduct their victim. Once inside, Sampson was subjected to horrific torture before being strangled to death. Her body was then callously dumped on a snowy embankment left to be discovered by authorities. In 2002, both Michaud and DeGorgio faced trial for their heinous crimes. The evidence presented was overwhelming, painting a clear picture of premeditated violence and depravity. The jury found them guilty of first-degree murder, along with multiple counts of sexual assault. Both received death sentences for their roles in Vanessa Sampson's brutal murder. As of October 2025, Michelle Michaud has spent over 22 years on death row. She remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she awaits her fate. No execution date has been scheduled yet, as her case continues through the lengthy appeals process that often accompanies capital punishment cases in California. Case 20. Brittany Marlowe Holdberg. Brittany was born on January 1, 1973 in Amarillo, Texas. Her early life was filled with tremendous hardship and struggle. After suffering a knee injury, she became dependent on prescription painkillers, which eventually led her down a dark path towards street drugs and prostitution. By 1993, she had given birth to a daughter, but lost custody due to her deteriorating circumstances and lifestyle choices. Holdberg's troubled past included experiences of assault and domestic violence that shaped her volatile nature. She met 80-year-old A.B. Towery Sr. through a fellow sex worker. On November 19, 1996, she visited Towery's home in southwest Amarillo. According to her account, an altercation erupted when Towery struck her twice in the head with a metal pan and threatened her with a knife. What happened next shocked investigators and the community. Holdberg attacked Towery with savage brutality, using multiple weapons, including a paring knife, butcher knife, grapefruit knife, and even a fork to stab him repeatedly. She inflicted blunt force trauma to his head with a hammer and shoved a foot-long lamp pole more than 5 inches down his throat. After murdering the elderly man, she calmly showered, changed into his clean clothes, and stole $1,400 from his wallet before fleeing to Tennessee. Holdberg was arrested in Tennessee and brought back to Texas to face justice. She was charged with capital murder, and on March 27, 1998, a jury convicted her and sentenced her to death. The prosecution successfully argued that her actions were premeditated and heinous, while the defense's claim of self-defense failed to convince the jury. As of October 2025, Brittany Holdberg is 52 years old and has spent approximately 26 years awaiting execution on Texas death row. Case 21. Catherine Thompson. Catherine was a former office manager from West Hills, California, who became desperate when faced with mounting financial troubles. In 1990, she devised a cold-blooded plan to murder her husband, Melvin Thompson, to collect on a $400,000 life insurance policy. Unable or unwilling to commit the murder herself, she hired Philip Conrad Sanders to carry out the deadly deed. On June 14, 1990, Melvin Thompson was working at his auto repair shop in Santa Monica when Sanders arrived. Following Catherine's instructions, Sanders fatally shot Melvin, ending his life in an instant. The murder appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, but investigators soon uncovered the truth behind the calculated killing. In September 1992, a jury found Catherine Thompson guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder with the special circumstance of murder for financial gain. The evidence clearly showed she had orchestrated her husband's death for monetary benefit. The jury recommended the death penalty, which was formally imposed on June 10, 1993. As of October 2025, Catherine Thompson has been on California's death row for over 31 years, still awaiting the execution of her sentence. Case 22. Samantha Lucille Rebecca Allen. Samantha was convicted of one of the most disturbing child abuse cases in Arizona history. In 2011, she and her husband John Allen were responsible for the death of 10-year-old Amay Deal, Samantha's young cousin who lived with them in Phoenix, Arizona. The couple subjected the child to horrific abuse disguised as punishment. The fatal incident occurred when Samantha and John forced little Amay into a small plastic storage box as discipline for some perceived misbehavior. The confined space made breathing nearly impossible. Amay suffocated inside the box while her aunt and uncle ignored her desperate struggle for air. The cruelty and callousness of this act shocked investigators and the public alike. In 2017, Samantha Allen faced trial for Amay's death. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and 4 counts of child abuse, with evidence showing a pattern of mistreatment leading up to the fatal punishment. The jury recommended death, and she received the death penalty, becoming the 3rd woman on Arizona's death row at that time. Samantha has been incarcerated for over 13 years at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of October 2025, she remains on death row with no execution date set.
Case 23. Tina LaSonia Brown. Tina was born on July 19, 1970, and by age 39, she had accumulated a history of criminal activity, including drug-related offenses in Pensacola, Florida. She had a daughter, Brittany Miller, who was 16 years old at the time of the horrific crime that would land Brown on death row. On March 24, 2010, Brown orchestrated an ambush against 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman with help from her teenage daughter Brittany and their neighbor Heather Lee. The trio attacked Zimmerman with a stun weapon, gagged her, and forced her into the trunk of a car. They drove the terrified young woman into isolated woods where the nightmare intensified. In the woods, they beat Zimmerman mercilessly with a crowbar. Then, in an act of unimaginable cruelty, they doused her with gasoline and set her on fire, leaving her to burn alive. Miraculously, Zimmerman survived long enough to identify Brown, Miller, and Lee as her attackers before succumbing to her injuries 2 weeks later at the hospital. Authorities swiftly arrested all 3 women. In 2012, Tina Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Her daughter Brittany Miller received a life sentence, while Heather Lee was sentenced to 25 years in prison after agreeing to testify against Brown. As of October 2025, Tina Brown is 54 years old and has been on death row for approximately 12 years at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida.
Case 24. Belinda Magana. At just 23 years old, Belinda Magana, along with her boyfriend Nares Lauren, was convicted of murdering her own 2-year-old son, Malachi Magana, in Corona, California. In May 2009, authorities made a horrifying discovery when they found little Malachi's lifeless body, showing clear signs of severe and prolonged abuse. Medical examiners documented extensive evidence of torture. The toddler's small body bore bruises, burns, and other injuries indicating sustained mistreatment over time. Magana and Narin initially attempted to explain away the injuries as accidental, claiming the child had hurt himself through normal childhood mishaps. However, forensic medical examinations directly contradicted their fabricated explanations. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse that ultimately led to the child's death. In 2015, both Belinda Magana and Nares Narin were found guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture, acknowledging the prolonged suffering inflicted on the helpless child. They both received death sentences for their crimes. As of October 2025, Belinda Magana has been on California's death row for nearly a decade. She is incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she awaits execution for the murder of her own son. Case 25. Robin Rowe. In the early morning hours of February 10, 1992, a devastating fire consumed the duplex home of Robin Rowe in Boise, Idaho. At the time, Rowe was conveniently staying with a friend, claiming she had left after an argument with her husband, Randy Rowe. The fire resulted in the tragic deaths of her husband and their two children, 10-year-old Joshua and 8-year-old Tabitha. As investigators examined the fire scene, troubling evidence emerged. They discovered that the smoke alarm had been deliberately turned off before the fire started. Further analysis revealed that a liquid accelerant had been used to start and spread the flames throughout the home. These findings transformed the case from a tragic accident into a suspected arson and murder investigation. Deeper scrutiny into Robin Rowe's background uncovered a damning pattern. She had taken out substantial life insurance policies on her family members shortly before the fire. Even more suspicious, investigators learned that Rowe had a history of financial difficulties and had previously collected insurance money from a 1980 incident where her son Keith died in another fire under questionable circumstances. Robin Lee Rowe, who was 34 years old at the time of the murders, was arrested on February 13, 1992, and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. During her trial, prosecutors presented evidence of her financial motives and the suspicious pattern of deaths. In March 1993, Rowe was found guilty on all counts, and on December 16, 1993, she was sentenced to death. As of October 2025, Robin Rowe is 67 years old and has been on Idaho's death row for approximately 32 years. Case 26. Tanya Jaime Nelson. At 45 years old, Tanya Jaime Nelson orchestrated the brutal murders of fortune teller Ha Jade Smith, 52, and her 23-year-old daughter, Anita Ni Hung Vo, in April 2005. Nelson, a resident of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, had previously sought Smith's services for a reading about her personal life, specifically wanting confirmation that her extramarital affair with her brother-in-law would resume. When the fortune teller advised Nelson to move on and let go of the relationship, Nelson became enraged by the unwelcome guidance. Consumed by anger, she decided to silence the fortune teller permanently. She traveled from North Carolina to Westminster, California, accompanied by her accomplice, Philippe Zamora. The pair arrived at Smith's home, pretending to make a friendly social call. Once inside, Nelson and Zamora launched a savage attack. They fatally stabbed both Smith and her daughter multiple times throughout the home. In a disturbing attempt to conceal their identities and confuse investigators, they covered the victims' faces and hands with white paint before fleeing the scene. In February 2010, Tanya Jaime Nelson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence clearly established her role in planning and executing the double homicide, motivated by rage over the fortune teller's advice. As of October 2025, Nelson has been on California's death row for nearly 15 years, awaiting execution for the senseless murders. Case 27. Lorraine Allison Hunter. At 62 years old, Lorraine Allison Hunter was convicted of orchestrating the cold-blooded murder of her husband, Albert Thomas, in 2009. Hunter's motive was purely financial. She wanted to collect on a $1 million life insurance policy. To accomplish her goal, she recruited her own 16-year-old daughter, Brianna Hunter, to assist in killing Thomas.
Prior to the murder, Hunter had forged her husband's signature on 3 separate life insurance policies, naming herself as the beneficiary on each one. This careful preparation showed the premeditated nature of her deadly plan. On November 4th, 2009, Albert Thomas was found dead inside the cab of his semi-truck, his body bearing 4 gunshot wounds. The investigation revealed the full extent of Hunter's betrayal. She had manipulated her teenage daughter into participating in the murder plot, forever damaging the girl's life for financial gain. The evidence against Hunter was substantial and damning. In August 2018, a Riverside County jury convicted her of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty for her crimes. As of October 2025, Lorraine Allison Hunter has been on California's death row for over 6 years, making her one of the more recent additions to the state's female death row population. We've journeyed through 27 devastating stories today, but the truth is, we're only halfway through. 20 more women sit on America's death row, each with a story that needs to be told. Some were monsters. Some were victims who became victimizers, and some may be innocent. Their stories deserve to be heard. Their victims deserve to be remembered, and you deserve to know the truth. Part 2 is coming soon to Crimelands. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it, because these cases will stay with you long after the video ends.